Welcome Home, a podcast for veterans about veterans by veterans, is a project of Willing Warriors and the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Good morning. I'm your host, Larry Ziliaks, Director of Culinary Services here at the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run. And this week our guest is Sue Fulton. She's the founder and executive director of Women in the Service Coalition, which is abbreviated WISCI and often referred to as just whiskey. Sue, I can't thank you enough for making time to be with us today. And I'm really excited to have you here because I know that the work that you do has really come into focus now lately, especially because of the current Pentagon review of women in uniform. And so welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
I think to level set for our listeners, I think we want to start with just telling us about your background, your service, and what brought you to a point where you decided that Women in Service Coalition needed to be founded and to be operational.
Well, sure. So I went to West Point right out of high school. And so that was back in 1976. And I graduated with the first West Point class to include women, commissioned in the Army Signal Corps, went to Germany. My Army experience was the formative experience of my life, both my experience at West Point and my experience in the active Army. I got out after 5.5 years because I'm gay, and at the time there was a ban on gay service.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen witch hunts in my unit. They were pretty destructive, but it was just not something that I will say that it was clear to me, just it had been clear to me at West Point, that a lot of talent was wasted in, the women, the very capable women who left because of harassment. It was equally clear to me that when there were these witch hunts just to drive gay and lesbian service members out of the military, that too was a waste of talent. But it also was clear that I couldn't serve honestly under the ban. So I got out after 5.5 years. That said, I kept my connections with the military. That community was so important to me. I mentored cadets, mentored junior officers. And, many years later, I had the opportunity to work on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Mm-hmm.
I also had the opportunity as an advocate to work on lifting the combat exclusion rule on women. So I continue to believe very strongly that a diverse force is a smarter, stronger, better force. That when we open the aperture to all of the talent that our nation offers, we can get the strongest military and the best military. And so my advocacy has been about expanding opportunities for women, for people of color, for LGBTQ plus people, for anyone who has the competence, the character, and the commitment to serve, to be able to fulfill those roles. Whiskey in particular came about, well, the first iteration of whiskey was around 2015, 2016, when the combat exclusion rule was fully lifted that allowed women to serve in every position that they were qualified for.
Mm-hmm.
And a group of us wanted to work to help support that. And by supporting that, what I mean is at the time, men, enlist, maybe they're interested in Ranger School, they go to the Ranger Battalion, and they not only get training before they go to Ranger School, but they get like all of the tips and hacks, and here's the right gear, and here's what you never want to mess up, and here's, they kind of get a lot of help in the sense of being fully prepared when they go to Ranger School.
Mm-hmm.
And at West Point, they prepare you. If you're going to IBOLIC, which is the Infantry Basic Officer Leadership course, there's preparation, there's things that are shared. Well, not only were women that go in the Ranger Battalion, but women weren't necessarily getting the same tips. But just as important, tips for men may not be the same as tips for women. Women don't wear their ruck in the same way men do because they carry weight differently.
Mm-hmm.
Women's gear is different. Their training programs for the same fitness test, actually the training program is different for women than for men. And so a lot of those things that were learned, we were sharing within the Army women who were going infantry and armor, who were contemplating Ranger School or planning for Ranger School. We were sharing those. And there were also retired male infantry NCOs and officers who were assisting that.
Mm.
And what we wanted to do was kind of expand that, because we knew in the Marine Corps there were women who were trying and failing. And what we want to do is, like, let's figure out, like, what are the things you should know to be prepared before you go to infantry school?
Mm-hmm.
That's an awful lot. But between 2015 and 2023, there was a lot of study of women in those combat roles. They were doing really well. And so in 2023, they stopped studying. They stopped doing surveys. They're like, this is working fine. And our original whiskey, we didn't, our work fell away. We all were off on other adventures and work. And then when Peter Hegseth was nominated for Secretary of Defense, a lot of us read his book, and there was a lot of concern that he had the wrong idea about women in the service, because he said, standards were lowered and women were forced into these roles that they don't really belong in. And what we wanted to do was first ensure that we set the record straight, but also we felt that leadership should reflect the service that women and men had actually done. And so I will say, whiskey formed pretty much in opposition to the positions that were taken in Peter Hegseth's book.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be clear on that, because we certainly were willing to give grace if his opinions changed, if his actions changed, so forth. But we formed particularly to advocate for women and some other minorities in military service that believed that developing women leaders and creating conditions for their success is going to benefit the armed forces in the future. And well, it benefits the armed forces now. So that is what we do. We advocate for the women in uniform and other minorities as well, because they can't really advocate for themselves while they're in uniform.
Sure. Well, let me ask you this. As far as there's roughly 160 female warriors who have gone through Ranger and have that tab.
It's about 184 now, but yes.
Yeah. But the standards are no different for them than they are for the men. Is that correct?
Oh gosh, yeah. The standards never changed. Well, I shouldn't say the standards never changed. The standards, they remained the same, but I will point out that when they did the pilot with the 19 women who volunteered for the pilot of Ranger, they were brought into Ranger School and had to meet those standards. Prior to the pilot, the washout rate for men was about 50%. During the pilot, when there were women going through Ranger School, the overall washout rate was 70%. What was happening was they not only didn't lower the standards, they kept to the very strictest standard. They didn't give any grace. There wasn't any wiggle room. They were very strict on the subjective parts of Ranger School, the patrols and so forth. So actually, a lot of the men who went through at that time, remember it as one of the, it was extremely tough. It actually was tougher during the pilot than it was prior. And this is true in the infantry as well. I mean, the standards to be in the infantry are the same for men as they are for women.
Well, and I think a lot of listeners don't know that. I think they've been led to believe that somehow women have a different set of standards and they're being led into these positions that they're not qualified for. And that's just not the case. They have to go through the same training, meet the same standards, whether they're going for a Ranger tab or whether they're going to Marine Recon. So
that's absolutely true. And the idea that these ranger instructors or the Marine recon instructors those are very proud groups of people. And the notion that they would relax their standards for a certain group of people just is bizarre. And I know that it pleases some people to think that, but it's just not true. In fact, they continue to maintain the same standards. I do know, the women who go into Ranger School go in as prepared as they can be. And in some cases, I think they prepare more than the men do because they're keenly aware that it's an incredible challenge and it's not something that a lot of women can do. And at this point, 10 years in, while more women do washout during RAP week of Ranger School, that's the first week and it's the most it's entirely physically challenging. Well, mentally challenging as well, but it's just really, really tough.
Mm-hmm.
There's a slightly higher washout rate for women than men in week one. After week one, so the women who survive week one, the washout rate for women and men is the same. Is the same. So in a 62-day course, after the first 7 days, in the 55 days remaining, the washout rate for men and women is the same. And those standards are the same as they were in 2014 before any women ever went there. In 2010, the standards for that school remain the same. I'm less informed about Marine recon, except that I can verify because we have been doing that work. I'm less informed about the numbers or the washout rates, and those are not really publicized. But I do know that they are very clear that they will not lower the standard for any Marine, male or female. And there's some outcomes with that. The women, because they prepare, they know that they are up against a really tremendous challenge. And I'm not saying that the men don't know that, but it's more common for men. And I think there's not a woman who goes to Ranger School without her eyes fully open about what she's facing. And what we've seen, one of the interesting outcomes is that since 2015, since the first woman walked into the gates at Ranger School, not a single woman has voluntarily quit. We've had Ranger School, during that time where 10 men quit in one night. I mean, it's not unusual, but the women who go there with determination. They go there with extensive preparation, and they go there with the right mindset. And I just think that I know I'm spending a lot of time on Ranger School. My background is Army, and that's kind of the Army's platinum proof of your combat fitness. But it's an example of, ways in which the military has said, all right, if you have the competence, the character, and the commitment, we're going to ask the same of every soldier or sailor, airman, or Marine who walks in these gates. And if you meet that, then you can earn your tab. And I think that's the right way to go. And that is exactly what's happening.
Well, and it's true with other branches too. Anybody who thinks that the Air Force is turning over an F-16, which is ridiculously priced aircraft, to a woman who's unqualified, you're just out of your mind. Our women veterans, our women warriors are really, truly just as qualified as the men. And I was in the Air Force at the same time you were in. I went in 77, got out in 83. And I was Air Force Security Forces, and we were part of, at Loring Air Force Base, part of a trial program where they brought women in to be in security forces. We never had it. It wasn't a thing. And we did have one woman who was on our flight, and she was just as tough and ready as the rest of us. In fact, more. I think a lot of the guys were scared of her, I think, but there's no way that she couldn't do the job. I mean, she qualified on firearms just like everybody else, and she's out there humping aircraft. And look, everything it took, is freezing to death with the rest of us. It's just ridiculous. This is such a ridiculous issue, and I see it. It's not only a force readiness issue, because they're just they're losing good people. And I often think about the good people that would have signed up if but for this kind of nonsense. And, this new Pentagon combat study that they're doing, women in combat study, I mean, it's not like it's an issue that hasn't been studied before. In fact, it's probably been studied more than any other issue. They're going to do it. What are the standards, or what would Whiskey like to see as a fair evidence-based process for that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you've seen with this administration is an incredible focus on physical fitness and particular kinds of physical fitness. It is true that men on average have better upper body strength than women. Men on average are going to run, short distances, and by short I mean under 5, like 10 miles faster than women. And there's less focus on the other aspects that make someone a good soldier or service member. And in fact, when they did they have moved this study now from IDA to the Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins, and it's not really in the wheelhouse of the Applied Physics Lab. However, there was a Marine Corps study done in 2015, and one of the leaders of that Marine Corps study was Jane Pinellas, and she is leading the study at APL. Now, you may remember that study that claimed it showed that all male groups outperformed gender mixed groups. Well, here's the thing. They got volunteers from the Marine Corps. Many of the male volunteers were trained infantrymen, and whether they had, 1 year of training or multiple years of training. So it was a mixed bag. The women went through the basic elements of infantry training. So, and the argument was, well, we're only testing on physically demanding tasks because we assume the women are just as smart as the men in the other tasks. Okay, there is data showing research among military populations that show that women often outperform men in stress regulation, in multitasking under stress, in observation and attention to detail, in clear communication, in decision quality, but they're not, so women outperform men in all those areas, but those were not the areas they looked at. They looked at only at physically demanding jobs. And then they were infantry tasks, and they pitted men who had, 1 to, I don't know how many years of training against women who just had training. And they said, well, you should be able to do these. We're only testing on tasks that require that were taught in basic training. Yeah. So you think someone that they are at their best at these tasks coming right out of basic training, or after they've been doing them in the infantry for some time? In fact, they had to change the way the tests were executed because they noticed that the male groups with more experience had hacks that made the task easier, that weren't done by the book, but they accomplished the task quicker, they were only measuring time. So the things that they basically proved that greater experience in training leads to better outcomes because the women didn't have that.
Right.
And then tried to make that an argument. That said, what wasn't reported was the mixed gender groups outperformed the men in the complex problem solving tasks. Some of them required, multi-levels of complex problem solving. They outperformed the men. The mixed gender groups also had greater target accuracy with short and mid-range weapons, and they were never able to explain that. But crude weapons, the mixed gender group outperformed the men, even though the men had more training. So, but that study, because it got incredible press, all male groups are better in the infantry. And the people who read the fine print were the military leaders. The commandant of the Marine Corps and the Secretary of the Navy acknowledged this was a very flawed study, even though the commandant, even though it was put forward as a reason for the Marines to continue to have combat exclusion. That's why the Secretary of Defense discounted it and opened all positions to women. And there are people still upset about it. We have seen that study quoted every time we post something about women, and it's not it doesn't prove what they think it proves.
Yeah.
When you have, and we're finding this out in the field. I mean, we've heard, okay, so for example, for many of the armor units, they are finding that their female lieutenants and captains are outperforming the men by far. We have a set of OERs where they're, number one of 26 captains I rate, number one of 41 captains I rate. And it has to do, I believe, with a lot of these other areas, these areas of decision quality, multitasking, which women have been proven over and over to be better than men at. We talk about, you mentioned an F-16. There are studies that look backward at all of the flights undertaken by male and female pilots in the military and in the civilian world. Female pilots consistently are better pilots than men. They've got to be able to multitask and be aware of a lot of different things going on. They've got to have great observational skills, and women just are innately better. Does that mean men shouldn't be allowed to be pilots? Of course not.
Yeah, it's just got to be an equal playing field. That's just the way it has
100%.
That's just
they have to establish, here is the standard to be successful in this job.
Right.
And then everyone who wants that job should meet that standard.
Sure. So thinking about our women veterans, and
Sure.
they are different from male veterans. There's absolutely no doubt about it. One of the biggest ways that they're different is that they separate and then they sort of melt into society. You don't see them wearing the hats. You don't see them wearing the shirts. You don't see them, at the American Legion that much. And they're just not availing themselves of especially VA services for a number of reasons. For a lot of them, they've just had bad experiences. And I know the VA is trying to correct some of that. We recently had a CBOC open up in Fredericksburg, Virginia, that has a whole department and section just dedicated to women veterans, which is a really huge step in the right direction. But what do you see? What does the organization think can be done to steer more women veterans towards the VA to take advantage of those benefits that they earned, they're entitled to, but they're just not, getting them?
Well, there's a couple of things that happen, culturally in the environments. Yes, women are the fastest growing group of veterans in this nation, but first, they don't identify as veterans. A lot of women, if they did not deploy to a combat zone, don't consider themselves veterans. So the first thing we learned is not to ask the question, are you a veteran, but to ask the question, have you served?
Mm-hmm.
And then help them, kind of lead them in the direction of what's available to them. And environments have to be addressed. I mean, we fought for a while in New Jersey. There was I don't want to identify, but there was a facility where the only place that women could wait for service, there were groups of men who just basically were there all the time, who would catcall any women who came in, and it was just it was intimidating and bothersome. And and it's also tough for a woman to go to get a service for the first time, and the question she gets asked is, "Oh, is your husband a veteran?" It's like, no, I'm the veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all had that experience. We've had that experience where, somebody has tried to, whether they're trying to, claim a benefit or park in a parking space, it's like, oh, your husband's a veteran. So, we have to address the cultural pieces of it. But I think that women's clinics are incredibly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Because, particularly with a high percentage of women, I mean, there's a high percentage of women in the population, period,
Mm-hmm.
who are sexual assault survivors.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a fact. And women military sexual assault survivors don't want to have to run a gauntlet of male veterans to get service.
Right.
So women's clinics are terrific. Now, unfortunately, with some of the shifts of, some of the cuts, the personnel cuts and shifts in spending at VA, there have been women's clinics that have entirely closed. It's the ability to just get a mammogram There's some of those facilities have been closed. So, they have to be able to offer women's care at all of the facilities, and they need to be able to offer it in a way that makes the veteran feel safe.
Yeah.
And I think that we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, for sure. What do you see as the future for whiskey? Where is it going?
Our organization, look, we are entirely volunteer. We have no paid staff.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is, we educate the public, the media, and members of Congress, and state governments about what's going on within the military. For example, the firings of women in leadership, people of color in leadership, who are fully qualified and very capable. This study about women in combat arms. Anyway, so we educate to try to make sure that the military remains a merit-based organization and doesn't adopt this ideology that women are to be supportive of men, that there's an ideology that women and people of color are not good leaders, that any job they get was because of favoritism, so-called DEI.
Mm-hmm.
And that disrupts units. It tears apart the cohesion and the teamwork that the military has worked so hard to build. And so we're pushing back on that. We would like to see a military that is once again striving to really be a merit-based organization where your gender and your color don't matter, where leaders understand that they are leading a diverse team and they understand that their people are different and they know how to lead. What we're experiencing now is a perversion of leadership that, we're going to preference white men. And that's just, you can look at the pictures from 2024 and the pictures in 2025, and it's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to preference white men, and we're going to preference people who sign on to the politics of the current administration.
Mm-hmm.
And those two things are just devastating to an effective military. And so we will continue to fight that. And hopefully, we will see a time when the military is back working toward that non-political, that merit-based organization that we were striving to be for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, then we'll fold up shop.
Yeah, until then, listeners, take a look at the webpage. It's www.wiscimil.org. Check the webpage out, plenty of resources. What are the ways that our listeners can help with this?
Well, we because we haven't raised a ton of money, and at this point, our outreach, so many people have joined that we certainly could use. If you can kick us, $20 or $50, that would certainly be great. At washout.org. But also, if you are a veteran who has served with women, if you are a woman veteran, tell your story. If you're a woman who served, tell your story. Tell your stories to not just to your family and friends, but tell them to your lawmakers. Let your lawmakers know that you want to see a United States military that doesn't prefer one group over another, that is apolitical, and that that anybody who can prove that they can do the job. Anyone who has the competence, character, and commitment to do the job should be allowed to do the job, and I think that'll help.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listeners, again, check out the webpage, wiscimil.org. Whenever you're on social media and you are talking about women veterans or with a woman veteran, use that hashtag she's the veteran.
Yes.
Remind people that there are women veterans out there that they run into all the time. They just don't know it. I'd like to see the more veterans that join the VA, that seek care through the VA, that get registered with the VA, the larger that population, the more money the VA gets from Congress. And so
Yes.
you might not actually depend on the VA for services, but you want to register with the VA and you want to make claims with the VA. And even if you get a 0 rating, I guarantee you that knee that hurt you when you fell out the helicopter is really going to hurt you when it's my age. So you might as well get registered and get in the system now. And being in the system helps everybody. So please go to the webpage, check it out, talk to your legislature, whether it's a state, local, or federal. Discuss veteran issues with them, and especially as it pertains to women veterans. Well, Sue, listen, I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking with us today, and wish you all the luck in the world with keeping whiskey going and just doing what you're doing.
Larry, it's been an absolute honor. I'm really thankful to you.
So, listeners, we'll have another episode next Monday morning at 0500. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. We're on YouTube and Reese Across America Radio. So until then, thanks for listening.
The Welcome Home podcast is brought to you by Willing Warriors, a nonprofit organization serving active duty service members and veterans since 2012. To learn more, please visit our webpage at willingwarriors.org.